My name is Claire, and I bought my dream lake house to find peace, but my family turned it into a battlefield. What started as a celebration became a public shaming, with my own father calling me selfish in front of 50 guests. They wanted me quiet, grateful, and giving, but they're about to learn that I'm not the girl they raised. I'm the woman they underestimated. Before we dive in, I'd love to know, where are you watching this from? Drop your city or country in the comments. The lake shimmered like melted gold under the setting sun, and for a moment, I truly believed I'd made it. My name is Claire, and this was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. My housewarming party at the lake house I worked years to afford. Upstate New York never looked more beautiful than it did from my own backyard deck, strung with lights and filled with the laughter of friends, neighbors, and extended family. I was wearing the blue silk dress Jenna helped me pick out. She said it made me look successful without bragging. At the time, I didn't think much of that comment. We were mid-toast, me with a glass of rosé in one hand, my other arm wrapped around my best friend Marcy. To new chapters, I said, my voice a little shaky, a little proud. And to finally having a place to call my own. Glasses clinked, people cheered, until a voice cut through the noise like a rusted blade. You've always been so selfish, Claire. Even this party is all about you. My father's voice, loud, clear, laced with disappointment. Time stopped. I saw Marcy's smile falter. A cousin froze mid-sip. A few guests turned their heads slowly, unsure if they heard right. I blinked, thinking surely I misunderstood. But then came the follow-up. My mother, Laura, muttering just loud enough for the crowd to hear. We didn't raise her to be so full of herself. The punch landed. Everyone heard that one. My jaw clenched so tightly I thought I'd chip a tooth. And then the silence set in. Awkward, stretching, suffocating silence. I forced a smile. A tight, unnatural thing that felt stapled to my face. Well, I laughed weakly, I guess we all have different definitions of celebration. No one laughed back. My father took another sip of his scotch and looked away, like he hadn't just humiliated me in front of my friends, my coworkers, my boss. Yes, even Janice from HR was here. She slowly set her wine down like it had turned into poison. I excused myself a few minutes later under the pretense of checking the cake. Marcy followed me into the kitchen, eyes wide. Claire, what was that? I shook my head. I don't know, he's never done that, not like this. She paused. Did something happen between you two? No, I said too quickly. I mean, not really. He's been weird ever since I bought the house. Jenna's engagement kind of got overshadowed by it, I guess. I didn't want to say it out loud, but I'd been feeling the shift for months. The snide comments about me not being marriage material. The way my mom patted my hand when I mentioned promotion. That's nice, sweetie, she'd say, as if I'd told her I won a free car wash. Marcy touched my arm gently. Claire, you don't have to explain yourself. But that's the thing I wanted to. I wanted to believe this was a misunderstanding, that they didn't mean it that way, that I wasn't just some trophy daughter they resented for doing okay on her own. Back outside, the air had cooled. The laughter had dulled. People were now breaking into smaller groups, whispering, avoiding my gaze. My uncle gave me a pitying nod. Someone I didn't recognize whispered to another, did she really buy this place on her own? I walked the perimeter of the deck, pretending to check lanterns, pretending not to hear the weight of their judgment echoing louder than the music. And in that moment, staring at the very lake I once dreamed of waking up to, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Small, alone, disposable, but something inside me whispered, not for long. The next morning, the lake was still, too still. Not even the birds dared break the hush that clung to the porch like fog. I had laid out breakfast, scrambled eggs, bacon, a basket of warm croissants, but the silence between us made it taste like cardboard. I was ready to apologize, not because I thought I'd done something wrong, but because I knew how this family worked. Whoever broke the tension first was the bigger person. I wanted to be that. I needed to reset whatever last night had cracked. I even wore the yellow sweater Mom gave me last Christmas, the one she said brought out my softer side. I barely sat down before Jenna struck. You made Mom cry, Claire, she said, biting into a croissant like it owed her something. You really think money makes you better than us? The words hung there, thick as syrup. My fork paused midair. Excuse me. Jenna rolled her eyes. Her engagement ring sparkled blindingly as she gestured at the house. All this, the speeches, the lake view, you didn't even ask if we needed help with the wedding before buying your little mansion. I looked to my mother for some kind of balance, some adult presence, but she just dabbed at her eyes with a linen napkin and said, "We didn't want to say anything, but yes, you embarrassed your father last night." Embarrassed him. I looked at Dad. He was staring at the lake, stone-faced. "You owe your family more respect than that, young lady," he finally muttered. There it was. I felt it again, that shrinking, that guilty daughter reflex. I reached for my coffee, careful not to let my hand tremble. "I'm sorry you felt that way," I said, choosing each word like I was diffusing a bomb. "That wasn't my intention. I just wanted to celebrate something I worked hard for." "Yeah, well," Jenna muttered, "must be nice to work hard when you don't have real responsibilities." "What does that even mean?" Her voice sharpened. "It means you don't have a fiancé juggling 2 jobs and a mom who cries herself to sleep because her daughter forgot her roots." I blinked. "Forgot my roots, Jenna, You didn't even offer to host the wedding here. And this place has 3 bathrooms, Claire. 3. I felt heat crawl up my neck. I could have defended myself. Could have pointed out how Jenna and her fiancé had vacationed in Miami last month on their tight budget. How I'd offered to help with flowers months ago and she laughed it off. But I didn't, because that wouldn't matter, not here, not to them. I just nodded and asked if anyone wanted more coffee. As I cleared the plates, my dad finally spoke again. "Don't forget, Claire," he said, not looking at me. "Family helped you get where you are. We made sacrifices too." He said it like it was fact, like it was fair, like my adult success was a tab they now intended to collect on. And I realized something right then as I carried the plates into the kitchen. This wasn't about what I said last night. This wasn't even about the house. It was about control, about rewriting the story so that my success wasn't mine, it was theirs. And therefore, it wasn't a gift to myself. It was a resource they had the right to manage. I stared out the kitchen window at the lake, the wind stirring gentle ripples across the surface. I had fought for that view, for the quiet, for a place that felt like mine. And I wasn't going to hand it over for the price of a guilt trip served over eggs and judgment. But for now, I smiled. I smiled and poured more coffee, because sometimes survival looks like silence. And revenge, it looks like patience. A week later, I found myself seated across from Mom at the old cherrywood kitchen table in the house I grew up in. It still smelled faintly of lemon oil and regret. I hadn't been back here much since buying the lake house. Too many memories, too many glances loaded with things no one dared say aloud. "I'll help with Jenna's wedding," I said quietly, sliding a check across the table. "Maybe cover some of the expenses." Laura looked up from her tea with an expression so practiced it could have won awards. Surprise, then softened gratitude, followed by that familiar maternal disappointment, the one she wore like perfume. "Well," she said, letting the word linger, "it's the least you can do, sweetheart." The sting landed. She didn't even glance at the check, just tucked it under a placemat like it had been expected. And maybe it had been. I nodded slowly, tracing the rim of my mug. "I know things got tense." Laura sighed and reached out to pat my hand. "It's not tension, honey, it's just family. You've always had such strong opinions, and that can come off harsh sometimes, especially to your father." Right, because his toast had been a hallmark moment. "I'm just trying to help," I said. Her smile sharpened almost imperceptibly. "And that's why we love you. You're the fixer." Something about the way she said it made me feel like a contractor instead of a daughter. Afterward, I drove home in silence, the checkbook still sitting open in the passenger seat, waiting for another signature. At the lake house, I poured a glass of wine and stood by the bay window, staring out at the moonlight reflecting on the water. I had always believed generosity bought peace. Now I wasn't so sure. That check wasn't for Jenna's wedding. It was for penance, for not being married first, for buying a house alone, for smiling too brightly when things were going well, for making people like Dad feel small without even trying. I thought that if I just leaned in, offered support, apologized enough, they'd come around, that they'd love me out loud again. Instead, I was slipping back into a role I thought I'd outgrown, the good daughter, the giver, the one who knew her place. Later that night, Marcy called. "You okay?" she asked, voice low and familiar. "I wrote a check for the wedding," I said. "Mom said it was the least I could do." She was silent for a beat. That woman could teach a masterclass in guilt. I let out a weak laugh. Maybe I deserve it. Don't do that. Do what? Let them twist you up into thinking you owe them just because you're doing okay. I shrugged even though she couldn't see me. Maybe keeping the peace is worth it. For who? She asked. And I didn't have an answer. I ended the call and walked barefoot out onto the deck. The lake was silver and still, like a held breath. My breath. This house was supposed to be my sanctuary. Instead, it was becoming a stage. And I was back to playing a part I never auditioned for. But if this was a performance, maybe it was time I rewrote the script. The boutique smelled like roses, lavender, and expensive pressure. Soft jazz played overhead while Jenna spun slowly in front of 3 gold-framed mirrors, the hem of her gown skimming the plush carpet. I sat nearby, awkwardly perched on a satin pouf, wondering if the clerk could sense the tension buried beneath my polite smile. "This veil," Jenna sighed, turning to the sales associate, "is absolutely perfect." It was. Ivory lace edged with hand-sewn pearls, delicate and feminine, just like the version of Jenna she always presented to the world. The same version that had vanished in our last few conversations, replaced with someone sharper, entitled, accusatory. But today she was soft again. Maybe it was the dress, or the boutique lighting, or the fact that I had just quietly handed over my credit card to cover the veil, and the florals she'd pretended to have already paid for. The cashier gave a discreet nod and walked off with the payment. Jenna turned to me, her eyes wide and glistening. "You really are the best sister," she whispered, rushing toward me. I braced myself, but she didn't slap or insult or scoff. She hugged me, tight, and for the first time in years it felt like the little girl version of her, the one who used to braid my hair while we whispered secrets in bunk beds, was back. When she pulled away, her mascara had smudged. "Maybe I've misjudged you," she said softly. I blinked. "That's one way to put it." She let out a watery laugh. "I mean it, you've been amazing. And I know I haven't exactly been gracious." I wanted to believe her. I really did, because that flicker in her eyes, it looked like hope, like healing, like we might finally turn a corner. "I want your wedding to be beautiful," I said, adjusting the collar of her gown on the mannequin. "That's all." She squeezed my hand. "Well, it will be because of you." I nodded, swallowing the emotion rising in my throat. It was a rare moment of connection, of something real. I held on to it like it might save us both. Back in the car, she was lighter, chatting about centerpiece colors, playlist options, whether she should do a second dress. I offered polite answers, not wanting to puncture the mood. As we pulled up to her apartment, she touched my arm. "Thank you again, Claire." And she meant it. For the first time in weeks, I drove home without a pit in my stomach. Later that night, I sat with Marcy on the deck, a blanket across our laps, 2 glasses of white wine sweating on the table. "So," she said, eyeing me, "Jenna hugged you in public without witnesses. Are we in a parallel universe?" I smiled. "I think we had a breakthrough." Marcy sipped her wine. "Maybe, or maybe she's realizing the wedding bank has a name." I looked at her sharply. "You think she's manipulating me?" "I think," she said carefully, "that sometimes people get so used to taking that they forget there's a person behind the giving." I leaned back, letting the night air cool my flushed cheeks. "I want to believe it was genuine. And maybe it was, but Claire," Marcy's tone softened, "you shouldn't have to buy your way into feeling like part of your own family." I didn't answer, not because I disagreed, but because I didn't want it to be true. I wanted to think I was helping, that my generosity was repairing something broken. But even as the stars shimmered over the lake, a small voice whispered in the back of my mind, "Or maybe they've just figured out your price." At first, I didn't notice the shift. It crept in like lake mist at dawn, quiet, almost pretty, until it swallowed everything. One day, Jenna texted me a link to a venue she absolutely adored. The next, she emailed me an invoice for bridal brunch catering. Then came dress alterations, a live quartet for the ceremony, calligraphy place cards, each with a gentle, almost apologetic message attached. "Just this one last thing. I'd cover it myself, but you know how tight things are. Only if you think it's fair." And each time I paid, because part of me still believed we were mending something, because part of me still hoped that if I kept showing up for them, they'd eventually do the same for me. But by the second week, I had to admit the truth. My generosity had turned into expectation, and expectation had turned into entitlement. I opened my bank app one morning and felt my stomach knot. Red numbers stared back at me like accusations. Overdrawn. Twice. I blinked, double-checking the date. Had the florist invoice cleared already? Or was it the makeup artist deposit Jenna had forgotten to tell me she put under my name? That afternoon, I sat on the edge of the lake house dock, trying to breathe through the anxiety clawing at my chest. "They don't even ask anymore," I said aloud. The breeze stirred the reeds. A duck paddled by, completely uninterested. "They just expect it like I'm their personal ATM." I didn't realize Marcy was behind me until she dropped down beside me, holding 2 iced coffees. "I figured you'd be out here," she said. "You always come here when you're spiraling." "I'm not spiraling," I muttered. She raised a brow. "You just muttered the words personal ATM to a duck." "Fair." I took the coffee, sipped, tried to breathe. Marcy stayed quiet for a while, just sat with me the way good friends do. Then finally she said, "Claire, you do know this isn't normal, right?" I blinked. "Families help each other." She shrugged. "Sure, but not like this, not with guilt, not with veiled threats or emotional blackmail. I'm just trying to keep the peace." "At what cost?" she asked gently. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're buying silence, not peace." I didn't answer. I didn't need to, because she was right. That night I sat at my kitchen table and pulled out a notebook. I listed everything I'd paid for so far: veil, flowers, venue deposit, 2 brunches, bachelorette party gifts, custom slippers, silk robes, chair sashes, for crying out loud. Total, $12,642. $12,000. And they hadn't even said thank you. Not once. The next morning, I woke up to a silent house. Jenna had gone radio silent for 3 days, which I assumed was because she was busy, or tired, or maybe hopefully reconsidering things. But then I opened my purse to grab my wallet for coffee, and it wasn't there. A wave of nausea hit me. I tore through the kitchen, the bedroom, the laundry room, checked the car twice. Nothing. I knew that feeling. That horrible tightening in your chest when something isn't just lost, it's gone. With trembling fingers, I opened my bank app again. And there it was. A $5,000 charge to White Swan Bridal Couture. My hands went cold. I knew that name. Jenna had gushed about their designer dresses weeks ago, the ones she swore were way out of budget. I remembered the boutique because the name had made her giggle. "It sounds like a ballet company that only sells dresses." I called the number listed on the transaction. "Yes," the woman said. "That card was used to complete a purchase yesterday. The bride's name was Jenna Cartwright." My breath caught. My full name wasn't even on the transaction, just the card, my card. I drove straight to her place, every stoplight a slow boil inside my chest. When I barged into her bedroom, she was folding laundry, humming like it was just another Tuesday. "You stole my credit card," I said. My voice was ice. She looked up guilty for only a second, then rolled her eyes. "I needed the dress, and you owe me this." "I what?" "You've made this whole wedding about you, Claire. The least you can do is give me one thing I actually want." I laughed, but it came out brittle. "I've given you everything, and you still take like it's owed." "You're unbelievable," she snapped, standing. "You think because you own a lake house, you're better than us. You think throwing money around erases the fact that you've always made me feel small." "I've never tried to make you feel small." "No," she spat. "You just always made sure you stood taller." And that's when I realized this wasn't about the dress, or the card, or even the wedding. It was about a story she'd been telling herself for years. And I was just the villain she needed to make it feel real. The shouting started in her bedroom. It ended in the driveway. I don't remember walking out there. I just remember the cold. The early autumn wind slapped against my arms, catching the hem of my sweater as I followed Jenna outside, both of us too furious to care that the neighbors might hear. "You stole from me," I yelled, my voice echoing off the silent cars parked along the curb. "This was supposed to be your happiest time, Jenna, not a theft." She spun on her heel. Her veil of politeness, the pretty bride mask, gone. "I hate you," she screamed. "I don't even want you at my wedding." The words hit harder than I expected. Like she didn't just slap me, but reached in and pulled something from my chest I hadn't realized I still clung to. My voice caught in my throat. For a second, all I could do was stare at her. This woman I had once braided hair with, shared a room with, defended at school when kids made fun of her for still wearing glitter sneakers in 7th grade. Now she stood in front of me, red-faced, hands clenched, daring me to say something. Anything. But I didn't. Because I knew that if I opened my mouth again, I would say something that couldn't be unsaid. So instead, I turned around. I walked, back down the gravel drive, past the wilted garden Mom kept promising to replant, past the cracked sidewalk where we used to race bikes, back into my car, into silence, and then back to the lake house where the air smelled like pine and the water always listened. I didn't cry right away, not even when I locked the front door and dropped my purse on the entry table. But when I got to the bedroom and saw the soft blue dress I'd bought months ago, the dress I was planning to wear to her wedding, still hanging on its hook, that's when I crumbled. I sat on the edge of my bed, my back bowed, arms wrapped tight around my ribs like I could somehow keep the pieces of me from falling apart. I don't know how long I stayed like that. Long enough for the light to change, for the water outside the window to turn from silver to black. The only sound was the ticking of the kitchen clock and the occasional lap of the lake against the rocks, and my own breath, uneven, broken. This was supposed to be about family, about showing up, keeping peace, mending bridges. But what no one tells you is sometimes the bridge isn't broken. It was never built on solid ground to begin with. The next morning, I called Marcy. She didn't ask what happened. She just showed up 30 minutes later with hot coffee, cinnamon rolls, and that calm look on her face she only wears when I'm at my worst. I guess she picked the dress, Marcy said gently as she looked at the credit card charge confirmation I showed her. Yeah, I whispered, my voice raw. She handed me a warm mug. Did she apologize? I let out a weak laugh. She told me I owed her, then told me not to come to the wedding. Marcy froze mid-sip. Claire, I know. She said that out loud. I nodded. Marcy sat back on the couch. Well, she said, folding her legs underneath her, that saves you the trouble of picking a gift. I smiled, even though it hurt. I didn't think it would get this bad. I know you didn't. You keep trying to write her a redemption arc. I stared at her. But maybe, she continued, this is the part where you start writing yours. I looked out at the lake, the water stretching wide and still like an open page. Maybe she was right. Because I wasn't the villain in this story. I wasn't even the side character anymore. And if Jenna thought she could steal from me, humiliate me, and then rewrite the narrative, she was going to find out just how much story I still had left to tell. For 2 days, I didn't leave the lake house. I didn't answer my phone, didn't check emails, didn't respond to the 100 silent buzzes from the family group chat Jenna had suddenly resurrected, probably to frame herself as the wounded bride in me as the storm cloud who ruined everything. Let them talk. Let them speculate. I needed quiet. I needed air that didn't smell like guilt. So I cooked for myself again. Real food. Not grab-and-go leftovers from catering tastings or half-eaten cupcakes from wedding trials. I poured tea. Sat on the porch wrapped in a blanket and just breathed. It felt like thawing out. The next afternoon, Marcy drove up in her clunky Subaru, fishing poles strapped to the roof and a picnic basket bouncing in the passenger seat. "You're coming fishing," she said. I blinked at her from the porch. She held up a thermos like a peace offering. "There's wine in here. You're welcome." An hour later, we were floating in my little rowboat, the lake smooth like glass and the sky that soft kind of gray that promised rain but never quite delivered. Marcy cast a line and leaned back. "You know what I keep thinking about?" I glanced at her. "That night your dad made that toast, about you being selfish." I winced. She continued, "I keep wondering what if he really believed it." I stared out at the water. "He probably did. But why?" she asked. "Because you bought a house. Because you stopped playing small." I didn't answer, because the truth was I had been asking myself the same thing. "When did it become selfish to succeed?" she said, shaking her head. "You didn't rub it in anyone's face. You didn't throw it at them. You just lived your life." I reeled in my empty line and reset it slowly. "Maybe they just liked me better when I needed them." Marcy looked over sharply. "That's the line, Claire. That's the one you need to hear." I shrugged. But deep down, I knew she was right. That evening, after we'd reeled in 2 trout and eaten sandwiches on the dock, I checked the mail. A single ivory envelope sat inside the box, heavy and pristine. The kind of envelope that didn't belong among grocery flyers or utility bills. My name was written in Jenna's handwriting. Curled letters, perfectly spaced. I walked it inside, holding it like it might burn me. Inside, gold foil danced across cream cardstock. "You are cordially invited," it was official. She had invited me to the wedding. After screaming that she didn't even want me there, after stealing from me, after tearing me down in the driveway like a tabloid headline, I stared at the date, 3 weeks away. Outside Albany. Some grand estate Jenna had found on a bridal blog. One of those places that looked like it belonged in a period drama where the bride floats down marble stairs and people clap like they mean it. I set the invitation on the counter. Then I just stood there. Part of me wanted to rip it in half. Another part wanted to laugh. But what I didn't want, what surprised me, was to hide. I didn't want to skip it, not anymore, because this wasn't about Jenna. Not really. This was about me, about showing them I wasn't ashamed, that they didn't get to humiliate me and rewrite the story, that no matter how they twisted it, I would still show up, still stand tall, and still walk into that wedding without flinching. "Are you serious?" Marcy asked later that night when I told her. I nodded. "I'm going." She narrowed her eyes. "For revenge?" "No," I said softly. "For clarity." She tilted her head. "That's not ominous at all," I laughed. I need them to see that they didn't break me, that I'm not begging for a seat at their table." Marcy leaned back against the counter. "Okay, so you're not going to cause a scene." "Not unless they do," she smirked. "You know I'll be waiting for the call with bail money if it goes south." I smiled, but my mind was already elsewhere. Already in that guest room upstairs, already laying out the dress, already rehearsing the silence I would keep, the power in not needing to shout to be heard. Let them think they can spin their story. They've forgotten something important. I own the ending. The night before the wedding, I stood barefoot on my dock, the lake a sheet of ink, the sky heavy with stars. I whispered it into the quiet just to hear it said out loud. "I won't let them shame me anymore." Not here. Not tomorrow. Not ever again. The water didn't answer. But it didn't need to, I already knew. In the guest bedroom upstairs, my dress hung waiting, soft blue, the color of clear skies after storms. Not flashy, not provocative, just me. Strong, simple, undeniable. I'd ironed it 3 times. Not because it needed it, but because I needed the ritual. I needed the steadiness. This wasn't about making a scene. It was about being unshakable in the room where they'd tried to break me. I slept lightly that night, my dreams tangled with music and chandeliers and the faint echo of my father's voice muttering, "You've always been so selfish, Claire." But in the morning, the first thing I heard was birdsong, and I took it as a sign. I got ready slowly, letting the act of dressing become armor. Hair curled softly. A touch of eyeliner, clear gloss. Heels, low enough to walk in but high enough to hold posture. The blue dress skimmed just above the knee, modest and elegant. I added a silver pendant, my grandmother's, and a pale gray clutch. Not to impress. To remind myself who I was before their opinions tried to rewrite me. When I arrived at the grand estate outside Albany, the valet took my keys with a polite nod. I stood at the edge of the entrance, watching as guests funneled in through tall double doors. Everyone looked polished, expensive, a little rehearsed. Just like Jenna's Pinterest board version of a perfect life. Inside, gold and cream draped everything. Chandeliers sparkled overhead. White roses bloomed from tall glass vases. String music floated from a quartet in the corner, their bows moving in elegant unison. I handed over my invitation at the reception desk and followed the usher's direction, left, through the ballroom, past the mirrored bar and behind a column. By the kitchen doors. My seat. I stared at it for a moment. It wasn't even subtle. I had been placed as far from the action as possible. No view of the dance floor. No access to the toasts. Practically breathing in the scent of garlic knots and staff cologne. I sat, smiling at the irony. Jenna was nothing if not thorough. Guests mingled, sipped cocktails, took photos in front of the flower wall. I caught glimpses of familiar faces. A few cousins, old neighbors, even Aunt Sandra, who had always whispered gossip with a glass of wine in her hand. But no one looked my way. Not even my parents. They stood by the bar, my father in a crisp black tux, my mother in a champagne gown that clung too tightly to a role she'd long rehearsed. the supportive matriarch. And Jenna, she floated. That's the only word for it. In a dress that probably cost as much as my property taxes, she moved through the crowd like royalty, laughing, air kissing, glowing in that specific, filtered way brides sometimes do when they think all eyes love them. The ceremony had been earlier, a garden affair I hadn't been invited to. Apparently, my presence was only requested for the fun part, as her message had read. Translation: come clap and keep quiet. Dinner began. My chair wobbled on the uneven floor. The woman next to me, a +1 named Caroline who worked in marketing, was kind enough to make small talk. But her attention soon shifted to her date, who looked bored before dessert even arrived. I nibbled at the salmon, pushed peas around my plate. Then Harold, my father, stood. He clinked his glass with the edge of a butter knife. Loud, sharp, conversations hushed, heads turned. "My daughter," he began, eyes gleaming under the chandeliers. "What a beautiful bride." Polite applause. He lifted his glass higher. "And now I want to share something very special, a surprise." Jenna tilted her head, confused. My stomach dropped. "Claire," he said, his voice strong now, "would like to present Jenna with a most generous gift. She's decided to give her the lake house as a wedding present." A ripple moved through the room. Soft gasps, then claps, then louder claps. People turning to look to see if it was real. Eyes landed on me. Jenna's mouth opened, then closed. My napkin twisted in my hand. I didn't stand, didn't flinch, but inside my pulse roared. And then, "Actually," said a voice from the back of the room, "that's not quite true." Every head turned. Jake, my cousin, Laura's nephew, tall, calm, always watching. He stepped forward, pulling his phone from his pocket. "And I think it's time everyone hears what really happened." Jake's voice didn't rise. He didn't need to shout. The room was already suspended in that eerie, electric quiet, the kind that crackles just before thunder breaks. "Let me play you something," he said calmly, holding up his phone. Jenna's smile faltered. Harold's expression twitched. And my mother, Laura, froze mid-sip of her white wine, her fingers going rigid around the stem. Jake pressed play. The ballroom speakers, moments ago pulsing with elegant jazz, now crackled to life with a burst of tinny feedback, followed by laughter. Familiar laughter, my mother's voice unmistakable. "She'll cave, she always does. Claire can't stand disappointing people, it's practically her brand." Then Harold, "We do it during the toast. If I say it like it's already happening, she won't have time to argue." Jenna chimed in, her voice syrupy, sweet with malice. "She'll be embarrassed not to go along with it. And honestly, she owes me. I mean, who buys a lake house solo and doesn't offer it for the wedding weekend? Selfish." More laughter, the sound of glasses clinking. And then my father again, casual and cruel. "It's just a house. What's she really going to do? Walk out during the reception?" A beat. My own breathing roared in my ears. My hands were fists in my lap. The room, once glowing with ambient candlelight and soft celebration, now felt cold, unforgiving. Like everyone could suddenly see what I had lived beneath for years. The recording ended. Silence. Then murmurs. Ripples of shock moved through the guests. Some looked down, embarrassed. Others turned to stare at Jenna, who now stood completely still, pale beneath her blush-toned gown. Harold stepped forward, blustering. It was hypothetical, we were kidding." "No," Jake said flatly, pocketing his phone. "You weren't." My mother stood, voice shaky but brittle. "Jake, how dare you?" "No, Laura," he snapped, for the first time using her first name like a warning. "How dare you try to manipulate someone into giving away the one thing that finally made her proud?" Jenna finally found her voice. "Why would you even record that? That's a betrayal." Jake turned to her. "No, betrayal is lying to someone who trusted you. This," he gestured to his phone, "this is proof." The guests, friends, co-workers, extended relatives began to stand. Quietly at first, but then more definitively. A chair scraped back. Someone muttered, "This is disgusting." Another, "I can't believe they do that to their own daughter." Jenna tried to speak again, but the room was turning. The pianist stopped playing. Even the servers began drifting toward the back, unsure whether to bring dessert or stay out of the way of a family unraveling at high society speed. And still, I didn't move. Because I didn't need to. Jake had done what I hadn't dared, exposed them. Not with anger, not with vengeance, with truth. My father turned toward me at last, face flushed with something that wasn't quite guilt but definitely wasn't pride. "Claire, sweetheart, you weren't supposed to hear it like that." I met his eyes for the first time in what felt like years, and I said only this: "I heard exactly what you meant." He opened his mouth, then closed it. One by one, the guests left. Some offered me gentle pats on the shoulder, looks of sympathy or quiet admiration. Others simply walked past Jenna and Harold and Laura with their heads held a little higher, maybe grateful to finally witness a lie being dismantled in real time. I saw my old boss, Janice, whisper to her husband and shake her head. A childhood neighbor mouthed, "Good for you." The DJ, unsure what to do, slowly packed up his gear. As the last guests disappeared into the night, Jake came over and stood beside me. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded slowly. "I just didn't want you to be alone in that room," he said. And I realized for the first time in weeks I wasn't. The next morning, sunlight filtered in soft and golden through the lace curtains, casting patterns across my hardwood floors like some kind of benediction. The lake beyond the windows was still, almost impossibly still. Like it, too, was holding its breath after everything that had unraveled the night before. I hadn't expected to sleep at all, but I did. Deeply. The kind of sleep you only get after months of holding your breath and finally letting go. And then a ping. My phone buzzed once on the nightstand, a single text from an unknown number, but the message was unmistakably from him. "I left her, couldn't marry into that. You deserve better, Claire." I stared at it, eyes wide, chest tightening. He'd left her. After the rehearsal dinner recordings. After the humiliation. After watching her true colors unravel like cheap ribbon in front of hundreds of people, he'd walked away. It shouldn't have mattered, but it did, not because I needed vengeance, but because I finally felt seen, not just pitied or applauded, but understood. The groom had seen behind the veil, and even he couldn't pretend it wasn't toxic. I sat on the edge of the bed, the message glowing on my screen like some strange beacon. Then I looked up, out at the water, still gray, still calm, and I smiled. Not a big, triumphant grin, not something for show, but a small, slow smile that curled up from deep within my chest like relief, like a quiet yes. They hadn't broken me. Not my sister with her tantrums and entitlement. Not my mother with her silk-wrapped guilt. Not even Harold with his booming voice and scripted toasts. I stood barefoot in the kitchen, wrapped in a hoodie, the sleeves pulled over my fingers like I used to do when I was 15 and hiding from the world. I poured a mug of coffee and padded outside to the porch. The wind tugged gently at the hem of my sweater. A heron skimmed the water. Everything was exactly as it had been before, except I wasn't. I sat down slowly in the Adirondack chair I'd sanded and painted by hand last spring, tucked my knees up to my chest, and just breathed. The ache in my chest had faded into something quieter. Not absence, but space. And in that space, I felt something I hadn't let myself feel for a long, long time. Satisfaction. Not the smug kind. The clean kind. The kind that comes when you finally know you did the right thing, even if it cost you more than you expected. Even if it meant standing alone. For years, I thought love meant giving until it hurt. That if I just poured enough kindness into people, eventually, they'd return it. But I'd learned something at that wedding. Something I would never forget. Some people only see your light as something to harness. Not honor, not protect, just use, until it burns out, but not this time, not this girl. I looked down at my phone again, reread the message. "You deserve better." It echoed louder than any of Harold's toasts ever had. Better than stolen credit cards and guilt-trapped brunches. Better than empty apologies and weaponized sentiment. Better than them. Later that afternoon, I pulled out a notepad and scribbled a list of things I'd been putting off. Repainting the guest room. Fixing the kitchen faucet. Starting that herb garden Marcy kept teasing me about. Inviting friends over, not for a party, but for laughter. Real, untidy laughter with wine stains and bad karaoke. This house, this lake house, was mine. Not theirs to claim. Not theirs to weaponize. And now, for the first time, it would be filled with people who didn't ask for pieces of me as proof of love. I spent the rest of the day rearranging bookshelves, baking a cinnamon loaf, and watching the sunset paint the lake in amber and coral. By nightfall, I felt different. Not just lighter, but whole. 1 week later, the trees had begun to turn. Golden crowns on maples, ribbons of red running through the birches. That crisp kind of upstate New York air that carries both nostalgia and promise, like the season itself is exhaling after a long-held breath. I pulled the apple spice cake from the oven, letting the scent of cinnamon and nutmeg fill the house. It was my grandmother's recipe, one she used to make only on fresh start days, as she called them. When something old ended and something new began, even if you weren't sure what the new part was yet. Today felt like that. I wrapped the warm cake in a clean towel, packed it carefully in a box, and slid on my jacket. The lake house door creaked as I closed it behind me, and I smiled. Even the creaks had become familiar mine. The drive to Jake's wasn't long. I could have sent a text or a thank you card, but this was something different, something rooted, something real. When I knocked on his door, it took a moment before it opened. He looked surprised at first, then his face softened. He didn't say anything, just stepped aside. I walked in and held out the cake box with both hands. "For you," I said. "Apple spice, it's a fresh start cake." He smiled, amused. "That a family tradition?" I raised an eyebrow. "A real family tradition, not the kind built on guilt." He chuckled and took the box. "Smells amazing." I followed him into the kitchen, where sunlight slanted through the windows onto the wooden table. Photos lined the walls, his dog, his mom, fishing trips, a picture of him and me as kids standing in ankle-deep lake water, holding plastic buckets like trophies. It was the kind of space where truth didn't have to be dramatic. It just was. I set my purse down and turned to him. "I never said thank you," I began. Jake waved a hand. "Claire." "No, really," I interrupted. "You didn't just play that recording. You protected me when I didn't even realize how badly I needed it." He looked down, tapping the edge of the cake box lightly. "You've always been strong, but sometimes the strongest people forget they don't have to go it alone." I swallowed. "I think I got used to surviving one little fire at a time." He nodded. "It's exhausting, isn't it, being the one who always fixes things?" My throat tightened. "I'm done doing that, at least for people who set the fires to begin with." A moment passed between us. Quiet, honest. Then he looked up at me and smiled, not out of politeness, but with something that felt like understanding. "Want coffee?" he asked. "Only if it's stronger than the family drama." He laughed, reaching for the pot. We sat at the kitchen table, coffee steaming between us, the cake cooling beside a bowl of apples. Outside, kids rode bikes past the porch. Someone's dog barked. A wind chime sang in the distance. Nothing extraordinary, except it was. Because this was the kind of quiet I'd always longed for, not empty silence, but peace. For years, I had craved validation like oxygen, from my parents, my sister, even from myself. I thought if I just gave enough, proved enough was enough, they'd finally see me, finally love me without condition. But now I realized I didn't need to prove anything. I just needed to belong somewhere that didn't ask me to disappear to be accepted. And here, at this table in this moment, I did. Jake cut us both slices of cake and slid a plate toward me. "You know," he said, "there's something poetic about this whole thing." I raised an eyebrow. "Is this where you compare my life to an apple?" He grinned. "No, but maybe you're more like the tree. They took from you over and over, and yet here you are, still standing, still offering something sweet." I looked down at the cake, thought about all the ways I'd bent over backward to feed people who never fed me back, and then I smiled. Because this tiny, cinnamon-scented moment was more nourishing than all those years of hollow applause and careful conversations combined. I took a bite of the cake and leaned back, and for once, family didn't feel like an obligation. It felt like choice. It felt like home.